What's going on here?
As first officer, I say that you are unfit to serve as captain.
You what?
You are a coward, and I challenge you for command of the ship.
Attention on deck. That means get on your feet, Nuggets. Pilots call me Starbuck. You may refer to me as God. Costanza, right? Not anymore. From now on, your name is Hot Dog, and when God speaks, Hot Dog, you listen.
Good day and welcome to Battlespace 9. Today's episodes are Deep Space Nine, Soldiers of the Empire, and Battlestar Galactica, Active Contrition. I'm Carl, and these are our guests.
Hi, I'm Gillian Daniels. I'm a short fiction and novel writer specializing in fantasy, science fiction, and horror. I have a bunch of short stories out. The most recent one, at the time of this recording, is in the Dark magazine. It's called A Game at Clearwater Lake, and it is a pastiche of a horror icon as opposed to a science fiction icon, though I guess some would say there's a lot of crossover. I was born in Iowa, I grew up in Cleveland, and now I'm living in Boston. I spend a lot of time writing. I also make comics sometimes, and I post on my Instagram and Patreon. And I'm a big fan of little-known horror movies. I always want to see pictures of your cat. It doesn't matter what the cat is or where it is. And I grew up in a Star Trek household. I watched Voyager every Wednesday with my family for most of its run. Lots of reruns of original Trek, Next Generation, and I'll talk a little bit about my relationship with DS9. Battlestar Galactica, I was definitely obsessed with the new version all throughout college and a little bit of high school. I was born in 1988, so revisiting these shows was a lot like revisiting very different parts of my life. So, Carl, thank you for inviting me to do this. This has been a very strange but very cool experience.
Hey, I'm Emily Taradash, and I'm a life coach and stand-up comedian and performer. I have pretty much no relationship to both of these shows. I have seen them peripherally throughout my life, but I used to be a costume designer, so I've spent a lot of time looking at things and telling stories. So I'm happy to be a fly on the wall today, chatting with you both.
I realized kind of preparing for this, actually, like one reason I'm doing this is it kind of, well, I sort of miss directing, and I miss, like, story analysis. Like, one of the things that's great about these shows is they are so well thought out. We can enjoy these as fans, but we can also sort of look at it as though we were looking at something that we were thinking about whether to produce.
Yes.
And I think particularly Star Trek has a lot of roots in theater. A lot of Shakespearean actors went through not just Next Generation, but also original Trek. And I think that shows in a lot of the style of the script, like very formalist style of acting, especially in the early episodes of, or the early series of the Trek universe.
On that note, let's go right into Soldiers of the Empire. In Soldiers of the Empire, General Martok is given his first command since his rescue from the Jem'Hadar prison camp. He asks Worf to be his first officer. The Rataran is the losingest ship in the fleet, beaten in battle again and again and again, and this should be a good chance for Martok to take some revenge. But something's off. Martok keeps passing up chances to press the attack. He is afraid, and his crew knows it. When Martok refuses to even mount a rescue operation for a damaged Klingon ship that has drifted into Dominion space, Worf can take no more. He challenges Martok for command, and in the fight, Martok regains his warrior's heart. They mount a rescue, and even better, here comes a Dominion ship for them to fight. The Rataran is back, and a grateful Martok makes Worf a member of his house. What did you think of Soldiers of the Empire?
I liked it a lot. I liked it more than I expected to. This premiered, it looks like, in 1997, so I would have been 8 going on 9 years old at this point. I did not entirely understand the appeal of DS9 at this point in my life. I was much more of a kid who was like, oh, I like it when they see new planets. Why are they inside all the time? Why are they on a ship that doesn't go anywhere? Why is it mostly melodrama and people working out their feelings? And, you know, I remember being able to kind of sense the emotional complexity as I sort of like would peek in on my parents watching this. But, you know, a lot of it went over my head. I don't think I got that Worf had a thing with Dax at all. That completely went over my head. So it was mostly like I just felt really stressed when I would catch a random episode with my family. I was also discouraged from following the show because of kind of the multi-episode story arcs involving the Cardassians and the Dominion. And I know there was like also some Christian kind of imagery that entered in later on. And I'm Jewish, and that doesn't, like, I don't quite have that background to understand everything. I found myself really drawn into this episode. I thought it was kind of like a story of dads. Like, Worf is attempting to please this Klingon Martok, who he's kind of identified as a father figure in many ways. But really, he has to be able to interface with Martok in a Klingon culture way that he's kind of begun to lose track of, I think, because he's been around humans and their human-y ways on DS9 for so long. Yeah, I thought it was interesting. And I definitely thought like some of the choices were kind of goofy, but it was a very enjoyably cheesy goofy for me.
I think kids don't get Deep Space Nine.
No reason to.
Certainly under 10. The same problems that children have decrypting Shakespeare, you might have decrypting Deep Space Nine.
This is really interesting because of the worlds that they're creating and the relationships that they're building between people, which is actually very subtle. Like that whole relationship between Worf and Dax, his girlfriend, and they make all these like coded implications that they're dating and that they're gonna like share a bed, and then it's like, no, we're actually not sharing a bed on this ship. We're all business here. We're all ass kicking, and there's no sexy times here because we have a job to do, I think we'll get into that a little bit more later with the 2 episodes that we looked at. She was essentially the company manager of the ship. She's like, everyone's really pissed off. Are you noticing it?
I love Dax in this episode for that reason.
Yeah. She's just like, excuse me,
And she kind of like takes over the role of HR manager. And I think at one point she referred to herself as science officer. And I'm like, what science are you doing? Social sciences? What is happening? Is this like a bid for the humanities? Which, yes. I mean, I feel like Star Trek in many ways is often that like sci-fi show that's like, actually, let's talk about philosophy. So maybe that's like part of the overall thought here.
I do want to know what Klingon scientists are like so bad. I don't think we ever met one.
That's actually something I appreciated about this episode. Klingons, even like in the more mainstream culture, are very much known as kind of the violent race in Star Trek. But here we see the ones on this bird of prey ship who are very emotionally vulnerable right now. And they have poor morale. They have repeated defeats. And in order to get over that, you have Dax being like, well, you have to be as violent as possible with them and give them blood wine. And it's like, this is their reassurance, getting them drunk and like scaring them and being shitty to them. And that's how Klingons get along.
Blood wine is well established as like the winner's drink. If you defeat your enemy, you drink some blood wine over their corpse or something. And this is kind of what's great about Dax being who she is, she knows how to get in with any culture, I feel.
Because she has like a symbiote inside her. I remember that. I did not
Yeah.
remember her name at all. I just remembered her as the Freckle Lady because she has that sort of like cool budget alien design where it's just like little dots along her face.
Yeah.
But, you know, actually what I appreciated was kind of the queering of that sort of symbiote thing, especially in this episode where she's like able to get in with the Klingons and, you know, she's like, oh yeah, in my past life, my symbiote was hosted in this body. And one of the female Klingons on the ship is like, yeah, my mom really liked you. And Dax is like, yeah, my host really liked her. And it's like, oh my god, literally it's a I fucked your mom joke. I just appreciate how much like Klingon culture is very open to how fluid Dax's relationship is with gender and even culture, because they know she's not quite what anyone expects her to be. I think she's very queer, and it's very cool to see that in a 90s show.
Agreed. She is the one who says, to your point, Gillian, Klingons are as diverse a people as any. Some are strong and some are weak. You know, this is being said at a time of like 30 years of fan debates about what Klingons are and are not. Mm-hmm. And it's a nice level set to have a character say, you know, only the direct inferior officer can kill you for cowardice. That's the only person who can kill you for cowardice. How do you feel about the sort of work environment on this ship?
It's very, like, sexy mood lighting, really. Like, I don't know how anyone gets anything done because you can't see anything, you know? Like, especially, like, when they're, you know, potentially going and trying to fight people. And I think in the cafeteria, it's very bright, you know? So it's actually the opposite of, like, our world, right? Like you go into a restaurant and there's mood lighting and it's like, I'm just setting the mood and we don't really want to see our food and we don't really want to see who we're with, but like there's just this like feeling. When I was younger, I was always really like weirded out by shows in space because I just felt like the magnitude of it all and it was like too much to bear. And I was just like, oh, I have no interest. Like, people were like, if you could go to space, would you? And I'm like, absolutely not. Like, no, I'm going to stay right here. And I've seen enough Apollo movies to know it just doesn't end very well. And no, I have no desire to like be in a small contained environment like that that's like dark and you're in dark space, you know? Like, and then there's people trying to kill you and you're trying to kill them. Like, I don't know.
That is the hell of it, because, you know, space, you know, this week they released a new photo from the Webb telescope. It's this beautiful star field, and it's great, but it's also like to be among them, you're like trapped in a garbage can that you can't leave. Like it's not, being in space must not be that different from being in quarantine in some ways.
Yeah, or being Oscar the Grouch. Like you're just in Sesame Street in this can and you can't escape and there are all these happy people, space. You know. He's like, I hate space and we're gonna go cause some trouble, you know.
It's certainly not a sensitive workplace. But no. It might, there is something to it that is more layered than I might have expected going in. I don't know, like if you're a Klingon, like everyone has to respect you.
To Emily's point about the constant mood lighting on the ship, that is definitely something I remember about Next Generation too, where every time you have like a Klingon set, it tends to be sort of dark golden light and sort of browns and very mood lighting. I definitely think these days watching it, it's sort of like, it's almost like Klingons are everything they're uncomfortable about: vulnerability, sexuality, disorder. They sort of sublimate into this warrior culture, which is highly ritualized. So you're not at a loss. You don't have to be worried. And I think, you know, that brings us to Martok's PTSD, where, you know, he was in this he was in this prison, this war camp. And, you know, he obviously had a really terrible time of it, and it's made him terrified to participate in the thing that defines Klingons, particularly in this episode, battle. And, you know, without that, he's lost his identity. He's lost his connection with his community. And I think Klingons tend to take their feelings and make them into combat, whatever those feelings are. I think in this episode, like, you start from the first scene. One of my favorite ways this was structured. The first scene is Martok in the sick bay, and Bashir is treating him and sort of chiding him for getting wounded. And Martok is like, "Rah, rah, 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 how dare you?" He's the Oscar, the Grouch in this scene. And by the end of the episode, he has staged a successful rescue mission of 35 prisoners who were, it's implied, were in the same sort of position he was, and he's taken them to the sick bay. So it's sort of like this is his emotional arc made physical. I cannot control my own feelings about being vulnerable and sick and having feelings about being weak. So I'm going to try to control my environment and help my community. And I think that's really interesting.
They do crush their emotions right up until they, like, let them all out in a warrior's yell. You know, PTSD, that's exactly correct. That's what he's facing here. When you're trying to treat someone, you kind of have to use it. You have to use their language and their values. Mm-hmm. You know, because this is not. You know, this would obviously not work for, like, me if I had PTSD. But for Klingons, I guess the only choice is to have your friend be your first officer, and then he lets you stab him on the bridge. You all need that friend who's willing to let you stab him.
I would love to know which of my friends is really cool with me stabbing them in ritual combat. That would be very useful to know. What you were saying about, like, having to get on the Klingons' level and sort of talk them through it, that's one of the things I was really impressed with in this episode. A lot of times Star Trek is like, oh, we can't violate the Prime Directive. We can't, like, violate someone else's cultures and enforce our own ideas on them. And then the episode is all about them doing that anyway. And I think DS9, particularly this episode, is like, well, actually, this is how Klingons do things. Dax, she gets it. And in an episode, if this was, like, all human or at least non-Klingon officers, if she was saying to Worf, oh yeah, you gotta fight this guy, she'd be Lady Macbeth. And that's not what's happening here. It's like, no, actually, she's right. She's completely right. Yeah, they needed to work out their feelings, and they did it, and everything was okay.
I think it's so interesting that, like, most of this show is actually about inner feelings as opposed to, you know, like, the battle, right? But I think it was really interesting too because there's this, like, big pirate vibe on this particular show, and I think relating this to, like, sort of Pirates of the Caribbean and these, like, stock characters that we are sort of accustomed to seeing, and even, like, Martok is sort of like Hook, and Hook, you know, has all of these anxieties about, like, the crocodile, and he, you know, is often sort of, like, depressed, and he lost his hand, and he has these anxieties, and he's obsessed with Peter Pan, and we're sort of used to seeing this archetype of, like, a leader who has been wounded and who is very emotional and colorful, being sensitive and being mercurial, right? And I also think it's interesting because in, you know, traditional theatrical drama, you have to have these, like, big emotional arcs. So it's almost like operatic in a lot of ways. There's such a difference in the mood of the fighting in this particular show than there is, like, you know, in war as we see it now, or even war, like, in Battlestar Galactica. Totally, like, a different vibe completely. Like, it's over there, it's very nice, we'll mostly get by. If we lose, then we're just losers. It's so sad because we're just losers in space, you know, as opposed to, like, the stakes don't feel very high about actually dying. The stakes are very high about honor, which I was actually really excited about. And that, like, this is almost like a Greek, you know, like this feeling of like honor is important and someone who's a coward can be killed because he's such a coward. And these are values that are lived by.
One reason I asked you to do this, Emily, knowing that you weren't into Star Trek, was I was kind of curious. If this were the first episode of Star Trek I saw, I would be disappointed that there weren't more Klingons in the series. Mm-hmm. How does it work coming on to this episode without knowing the backstory?
Yeah, so it totally got the context between Worf and Martok and what happened before, and like all of that made good sense. And then it laid out well, like, you know, that he was an orphan and that like he didn't have a house and he was sort of a man without a country, and that's how he could sort of like code switch into like that's what this episode was for me. I was like, oh, okay, like the Klingons are black people with like additional makeup. Like this is what this looks like to me as a person who doesn't know the show at all. It did really strike me as, you know, sort of first world culture versus not. And there was a lot of like othering, I felt like, and a lot of assumptions being made about how people would behave. And I was like, wow, this is really, really interesting to watch this right now because, you know, I know at the time it was a show that was much more equitable about having people of different races on it. I was aware of that. But now it sort of feels a little like, oh, what are we saying? What are we saying about, you know, because who's writing this and like who's watching it? Like we're all white, so you know, like.
Right. Well, this is a very good question and topic. I think a lot of a lot has changed over the years. You know, partly for who Klingons were supposed to represent versus who they are played by.
It was definitely pointed out to me as a teenager that, like, you know, the Klingons start to get weirdly racially coded in the 90s when Next Generation happens. And, you know, they were coded before, like I said, as USSR. Okay, there is an episode in DS9, I remember this, and I don't remember the name of the episode, where a couple crew members, including Worf, time travel to the original Trek episodes, and they see Klingons, and one of the characters leans over and is like, those are Klingons? What happened? Where did you get the facial bumps from? And Worf is like, we don't like to talk about it.
Yeah.
I thought it was a really great meta joke. And I think they try and address that in the episodes I've seen where the Klingons are in Discovery, where it's sort of like, well, not all Klingons look the same. Like,
yes.
And that's really, I don't know, Star Trek, because they're introducing so many alien races, and in, you know, at least in the shows where they go to, it's not just interiors, they go to, like, planet side. You see a lot of different cultures. You tend to see, like, you meet a couple representatives from each of those cultures, and that's the culture. And, you know, as we know, like, cultures just are not monolith. So that's,
Exactly.
So, and, so, I don't know. Like I said earlier, I think wanting to explore feelings of discomfort around race, like, if you want to do that, doing it in a sci-fi setting is probably a lot better than doing it in other shows where you're regurgitating stereotypes about a particular race. But, you know, it still reads in certain ways like that, and it's not great. But I also, I don't know, I have an affection for Klingons as a fictional species. I really admire the fact that the guy who put together Klingon language said, you know, I guess I could have used like a Native American language or something. Like, I was told to do that, a language that wasn't used anymore. And I said, no, I have to make a constructed language because it's very important that that the Klingons be their own thing. And they are. Whatever feelings, whatever stereotypes end up sort of floating to the surface.
I would certainly concede that I doubt that there has been a conception of Klingons that is not stereotypical in some way. And that's not the only alien race in Star Trek where that happens. I guess I've been thinking about this recent couple of years. You know, the original Trek idea of we can't talk about the Cold War on television, so we will make up this TV fictional thing where we talk about it in metaphor. I just don't think we have to do that now. You know, I feel like we can just talk about our differences now on TV. What I wish that would mean for Star Trek is I feel like the aliens should just be their own cultures. You know, there's a lot of interesting stuff about Klingons that is sort of short-circuited for me if they are being metaphors for something else. And I don't know how you get there from the 50-year history that comes before. A lot of it is just in the minds of who was allowed to write these things at the time.
Yeah,
sadly.
I mean, I do think it's inevitable that some of the biases writers have will be reproduced in their stories. I think as a writer myself, at least for short fiction, when you create fiction, you're making a series of conscious but also subconscious choices. Carl, I think you were also about to talk about the Ferengi, which show up very briefly, and Ferengi are also well known for reproducing a lot of like Jewish stereotypes. They're greedy, they have exaggerated noses, and I don't like that as a Jew myself. But I do understand that, you know, we have a lot of feelings about each other as people, and those don't go away just because we're like, well, everything's fine now. We all have the same rights. We're all equitable. And it's like, no, not really. That's something you have to work toward over time. That is a process.
I think key to what we're talking about is the characters at least have to be three-dimensional.
Yeah.
For better or worse, these are the most three-dimensional Klingons we have seen up to this point, I would say. But this was also 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Yes.
I did want to point out Cornyn, the sort of intense crew guy who punches somebody. He is played by Rick Worthy, who would go on to play a Cylon on Battlestar Galactica.
What?
We have not met him yet, but I believe he shows up in season 2.
Oh my God, that's so cool.
Yeah. We should praise Michael Dorn. I think we're gonna have to move on to Battlestar in a second, but you know, Worf is a Klingon raised by humans, and I sort of feel like on this ship you can tell when he is talking to Martok, he almost comes off like Spock to me.
Yeah,
like that kind of reserved.
I think it's really interesting, actually, now that you bring that up, that he has this sort of withheld, clipped, really to the point way of speaking, which is like not how any of the other Klingons are speaking at all in the episode. Like they're so much more sort of like languid and intense and, you know, just having their emotions out. Worf is definitely wearing a mask in many ways, you know, very collected. And I think that we see a lot of his inner monologue in this episode. I really liked how much we saw of him, actually, because it was really like him working out, him making the choices, him laying the groundwork about like the relationship that he had with Martok. So his relationship with Dax, like his relationship as the man in the middle, like he was the man in the middle the whole episode because he's like not the leader, you know, like intentionally like in the back seat, sort of driving the bus from the back seat, like this entire episode. And then ending up making space for somebody else to like take credit, but also like essentially too, like never being fully himself.
And Worf as himself is definitely a open question.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes he struggles so much that it almost makes you wonder if he's forgotten how much of himself he already is. I think a lot of what's great about Dorn's acting is kind of hidden in plain sight. Like it's in what he chooses to not do as much as to do.
Yeah, beautifully said.
Yeah, I think Michael Dorn really shines in this episode in his hesitance, in his silences. And I like how the writers try to defy expectations by making Dax like a much more comfortable with Klingons than a Klingon is. Yeah. It's interesting.
That's the fascinating thing watching Deep Space Nine is that, Worf was the Klingon in Star Trek for like a decade. And then suddenly someone comes up, Dax comes up, and he's like, you're a very unique man. I've known tons of Klingons, and you're not like any of them. And that's love.
Yeah,
I guess.
Between those two characters, yes. No, I mean, because I have more experience watching Next Generation, yeah, I definitely got used to thinking as Worf as the most Klingon of all the Klingons. And that's just not true by the time you hit DS9. His backstory is so much more complicated than that. And I appreciate that, Michael Dorn is really trying to dive in and balance what that would mean for the character.
And this is the show where he gets the chance to do that. This is the one that says this is what it's like to live with people. And that's a fascinating thing.
In contrast, I think the Battlestar Galactica episode we're going to talk about isn't so much just about living with people, but how to survive with people.
How to survive.
Yeah.
Active Contrition, Battlestar Galactica. A bunch of Galactica's pilots are killed in an equipment accident on the hangar deck. The fleet needs new pilots. That means it's Starbuck time. She is a skilled pilot and a qualified flight instructor, but she blames herself for the death of Zach Adama. Commander Adama gives her a pep talk, assures her that she has his full confidence, but he does not know that Starbuck only passed Zach because she had a relationship with him. Starbuck takes her guilt out on the new recruits and fails them all en masse. Finally, she fesses up to Adama, and Adama gets mad. Very mad. Starbuck reinstates the trainees and begins actually teaching them, and it works out, until a sneak Cylon attack happens. Starbuck saves her students, but gets cut off from the fleet, tumbling down towards an unknown planet with an equally disabled Cylon ship. What did you think of Active Contrition?
So I remember watching a couple episodes of Battlestar Galactica when I was in college, and I don't remember this episode at all. I thought it was really interesting how it was filmed because it was that early aughties thing of like sort of like, oh, we'll just go into this and then we'll like go into that. And are we in the memory or are we now? Who knows? We'll use as few words as we can. And it'll just be all sort of pseudo-sexy images of people together. And it felt very Eyes Wide Shut, or there was that movie, I can't even remember what it was called. It was just so early aughties. Like everybody was like, this is what love is. I'm so confused. Natalie Portman and like somebody else.
Is this like an erotic thriller type thing? And
yeah.
Did Natalie Portman wear a wig at one point?
Yeah, I think she did wear a wig at one point.
I know what you're talking about, but I never saw the movie, just the trailer. And it was like, this is an adult movie with sexy people, and they do sex. And I was like, okay.
I know what you're talking about, too, but I did not see the movie, but I saw the play
yes,
based on
the
movie.
play, exactly.
So
it was a play in a movie.
Yeah, I had a friend who had played the Natalie Portman part, and she's wearing the Natalie Portman wig you're talking about, Jillian. But I can't remember the name of the play.
I keep wanting to say Close Encounters, but that's not right.
Closer?
Oh, Closer. That's what it was. It was Closer.
Closer.
Yeah. And everyone wanted to do Closer because, like, you were really an adult if you did Closer, you know? Like, you were really good if you could do that. And so I just had, like, big Closer vibes that happened to be in space.
Yes.
And now watching that, looking at the camera work, I want it to be a comedy because it's almost like the person who filmed this then went on to do The Office. And so it felt really strange to watch this because I couldn't take it very seriously. B, I didn't know what was going on and I didn't care. And I actually, in contrast with the Star Trek episode, I was like, oh, like I know these characters, even though I'm just seeing this. Like I have some familiarity, and like they're laying it out really well, and they're using complete sentences to talk to one another. And I thought the writing was so strong, but like this was like way more special effects, and like, you know, with Top Gun coming back out, it felt like, you know, this sort of like, we're going to make like a feminist version of Top Gun in space. Like, that's sort of how it felt. But then she's still screwing up because there's still this sexual tension thing that we have to put in. We can't just have a pretty blonde flight instructor who doesn't sleep with people. She also has to, you know, do something sexual so we can like have the naked back shot with her moles. Slice of life, and very like taking me back to another time that I was like, ooh, I don't know if I want to think about that time in this light, you know, like through this lens. I was a little like, I remember this being better than it was, and now I don't know.
Well, I think the oddiesness is right on point for what to talk about with this episode.
Oh yeah.
Gillian, what did you think?
I think the fact that these are barely 10 years apart, like this is from 2004, like 6 years later, the cultural shifts are just seismic. And it's such a different show. So let's see, what happened between 1997 and 2004? Well, on TV, we had the premiere of The Sopranos. 2004 was also the beginning of Lost, House. Suddenly we had a shift to more prestige dramas, and maybe a joke would happen once in a while, but it was nowhere near the level of sort of the more slightly softer, less low stakes world of Star Trek. Even DS9, which was like the serious Star Trek at that point, like it never got quite as stressful. Maybe there was a fear that, oh, life support systems will go out, but it's not physically like constructed as stressfully as like the beginning of this episode, where you have all these soldiers and they're celebrating, oh, this guy just completed his 1000th flight, it's great. And then he dies. Him and like 15 other soldiers die. And it's a terrible accident. I watched this show religiously through college. And it because the premise is so bleak. It starts with the apocalypse. It's like 12 different planets, and the Cylons take over and make life unlivable on all of them. The show is already really bleak, and then you have an episode that begins like, oh, everyone's happy, and I'm like, uh-oh, something bad's gonna happen, and it does. And yeah, it paved the way for a lot of prestige dramas. And in contrast with DS9, I feel like the music is much more tight. It's much more about like evoking the feelings. You have drums and stuff. The editing, like you said, is more. It's a bit more experimental in comparison to DS9, which I think tried to hew very closely to traditional, especially because it's such a strange Star Trek show where they don't go planetside. I'm gonna say that again until I die. And also, I found that acting so much more naturalistic. So you have the dread apocalypse happening and people yelling at each other, and the president has cancer, and a bunch of characters are Cylons without knowing it, and some of them do know it and they don't know how to communicate it. And then you have Starbuck, who in the original Battlestar Galactica series was a dude, so they make her a woman in this one, and she's such a complicated character. My response to her throughout this episode is, I hate the choices you're making, but goddamn, you're an interesting woman to watch. And I love a complex female character. I love a female character who's sexually active. I get what Dax was saying in the DS9 episode about, like, I have an empty bed, but it's empty by choice. Like, I get that. But I'm also kind of like, I don't want to go down the Puritan, you're a better character if you don't have sex route. Like, it's, I don't know, I'm so conflicted because I don't want a female character who's defined by her sexuality, but I don't think Starbuck is that character. I think she's also defined by making terrible mistakes all the time. Like, not telling her dad / or not not actual dad, but her father figure, Adama, hey, by the way, I was engaged with your son and I had a hand in killing him. Like, she doesn't tell that until after the world ends, which is so Starbuck. I don't know. It's this episode, I was actually very emotionally invested in it. But yeah, I was kind of like, damn, if this came out now, I would really be wanting, like, somebody to tell a joke at some point.
Yeah.
What you said, Emily, about The Office really blew my mind. And it also, I admit, it also sort of killed my heart a little bit. I can't, because you're right. You're absolutely right. But at this point, there wasn't an Office. I don't even think there was the British Office. I think that this was the show that did the handheld thing most famously and earliest. It kind of evoked the military operations that we were seeing on CNN.
Yeah.
And Ronald D. Moore created this show, and he wrote Soldiers of the Empire. Mm-hmm. So it's this is very much a test case between like what he could do on Deep Space Nine in the 90s and what he is known for doing in this post 9/11 show. But the question of Starbuck and characterization is something I was very curious about, and I'm glad you jumped into it, because it's I feel like a lot of the discussion kind of comes down to, is this a real person or is this a stereotype?
I definitely find Starbuck a much more layered character. And I think she, at least if we're just looking at these two episodes alongside each other, she kind of wins the prize for like a more interesting person. She feels like somebody I could talk to and like I would hate sometimes, but I'd also like sometimes, because she does have a very interesting personality. She's all personality. That poker scene, one of many poker scenes I remember throughout the series, where she's smoking a cigar and she's trying to be one of the guys, and she is one of the guys, and she kicks ass, but she's also like an asshole. Like she's a jerk, and
Yeah.
I love jerky female characters. I love seeing women who are complex. And I think one of the downfalls with having or trying to show female characters and be like, well, this woman is a good role model. And it's like, yeah, it's great to have a female character who's a good role model, but not every character should be Wonder Woman. Like, that's not very interesting storytelling. I want characters who are characters, and that means seeing them do really shitty things. And while, yes, I feel bad that Starbuck blames herself for Zach Adama's passing, she has a right to blame herself. She was very, very culpable in it. You do not pass somebody, past somebody because you think they're cute, and then they get themselves killed. Like, that's so fucked up. I will also say, yeah, the 9/11 and the war in Iraq imagery, the war in Iraq, I looked it up online. That began in 2003. And this came out a year later. And yeah, there was a lot of like taking that imagery from the headlines and sort of recontextualizing it in space. And I have complicated feelings about the military being depicted on screen. Like, I do think you have a dysfunctional military sort of shown here, not just in the aftermath of the apocalypse, but also like, we're a family. And as a family, we all have like very incestuous, fucked up relationships with each other. Yeah, I just love that Kara Thrace is a complicated character. And I actually love the editing of her crash landing. Like, we're flash forwarding to the end of the episode. And I think that descent mirrors her descent into despair and crushing guilt over the fact that, yeah, she caused Zach Adama's death, and she has been keeping this secret so long. Of course, William Adama is going to be pissed at her. Of course, he's not going to forgive her when she finally, like, comes out and says it. Like, she's not even the one who comes forward. He has to push her to, like, confess to her role in his son's death. Like, of course, the end of the episode is going to be a downer after that happens. I found this episode very devastating, but also just so beautifully well written. I feel like most of DS9 is people hanging out in the lounge and bar area, chilling with each other, and, you know, telling like quippy one-liners. And then you have like dark trauma where everything is terrible. Like, there's a happy medium, and
Yes.
I don't think either show hits that medium.
Right. Well, Battlestar was designed to blow past that medium, I think.
Yeah.
Speaking of what else has changed is sort of the prevalence of sort of grimdark nerdery. We hadn't even had Zack Snyder's. I don't even know if we'd had a Zack. Oh, Zack Snyder had made movies, but he had not made like Superman versus Batman or Grim for Grim's sake. Grim is better than happy automatically. We hadn't seen as much of that in the 2000s as we would eventually see. People did call this Sopranos in space at the time. Mm-hmm. I remember hearing a statistic before Netflix lost all the Star Treks. I guess the most popular Star Trek to watch was Voyager on Netflix. And I think that makes a lot of sense because, a lot of these shows are warnings about what could happen, how dark things could get. But if you're already dark, you don't need a warning. Maybe you need someone like Janeway who can sort of construct a crew and a mission out of chaos.
I think I'm going to disagree a little bit. So I like horror and I like grimdarkness as well. I think that sometimes when you're in a really bad place emotionally, it's actually a great thing to see something even darker. Because, as somebody who has anxiety and it's sort of like, it's mostly fears of very abstract things, seeing the worst case scenario of a world where, much like Battlestar Galactica, the apocalypse has happened, and seeing people deal with the fallout of that is very cathartic for me. So I am going to go on the defense for grimdark. I am going to say Game of Thrones had some damn banger episodes, and I think this is one of the shows that paved the way for that.
Big time.
I think, but I also think that not everything is one thing. One of the things that makes this episode as dark as it is you do have a very jovial beginning with all these soldiers sort of chilling and being happy, and they're about to do this silly thing, a rite of passage with the 1000th flight, and then of this one soldier who then dies really horribly.
Well, I think actually that sort of connects it back to the Star Trek episode and this sort of feeling of Shakespeare. Because you have something really funny and great, and then all of a sudden there's a turn and everything's horrible, and then Hamlet dies and everyone's dead. So I think it's interesting for me. I did not like the writing at all in this show. When I'm feeling anxious, the last thing I want to do is watch something hypothetical that doesn't exist that's anxious, don't need any more help. I don't want to go on a roller coaster. I want to stay here and I want to meditate and ground myself. That's what I go to. So I would probably much rather go and watch any sort of point, close your eyes and point at Star Trek, and then probably one of those will be very soothing. I just could not invest at all, one iota, because I was this is not going in a good direction. I can already see that. You've laid it out for me from the very beginning that they're spiraling into another planet. Obviously she's going to crash. She might die. This other person died. Oh, well. I was just where are we going? What's happening? Oh, okay, it's bad and it's getting worse. Cool.
I think it's absolutely valid to respond to stress by being I don't want more of this. Yeah. And I have friends who are just not into horror as a genre. And meanwhile, during the pandemic, one of the most self-soothing activities I've done is I've been watching tons of horror movies, mostly vampire movies, some zombies in there. I finally saw Dawn of the Dead by Zack Snyder, which I think came out the same year as this episode, by the way. I think Zack Snyder was just starting films at this point. So he hadn't yet hit peak quote unquote grimdark. I also say, Carl, you brought up The Office earlier. American Office was still another year or so away. UK Office, that was happening, and I can't watch UK Office because the humor is so awkward and so difficult to watch. So that's my kryptonite, awkward humor. And also I think in many ways that version of The Office is much more cynical about the world. And it's because they wrap that cynicism with jokes that it's more distancing for me. I don't know, there has to be like, you can tell a joke, but also the world is collapsing, and you can also talk about how you're going to make the world better. And I don't know, it depends on the story being told.
See, this is what's totally fascinating to me as well, which is that these are both sort of too complex to even make almost to make generalizations about. Even though, as a podcaster, my job is to make generalizations and have people argue with them. But you could. I completely agree with you about horror movies, Gillian. Mm-hmm. I've been into horror in recent times. I think part of it is like, what is your baseline? Like, do you get more stress from feeling like you're avoiding the pain, or do you get more stress just by the pain itself? And the other thing, Battlestar, as much as it has contributed to grimdark, I don't think it is the grimdarkest thing in the world. Partly because it. All this stuff happens, and yet the characters are still the characters. There's something unannihilatable about Starbuck. You can kill her, but you can't change who she is. You can't change who Adama is. And I think that's really, for better or worse, there is something refreshing about that.
I agree. I also think William Adama, at the beginning of the series, then they started with like a sci-fi original movie to kick off the series. Adama's about to retire. Like this was supposed to be. He wasn't supposed to be in the game anymore. So his story is about a guy who is supposed to be retired, and he just has to keep going. And seeing him keep going, even as terrible things happen. I will say I was also brought into this episode not just because of nostalgia for my time spent watching it. I had like a whole watch group with people in college too. It was also like the world details that I think just dive really deep. Like, if you notice throughout the episode, they have octagon-shaped playing cards, but also the photos all have hanging in Lee Adama's locker of Starbuck making out with his brother and him like awkwardly standing off to the side. Like, that is also eight-sided. The sheets of paper you see are eight-sided. The polytheistic religion where everyone says gods instead of oh God, and also the refrain so say we all, and how they say fracking instead of fucking. I don't know. It's just such. I feel much more involved with this world than with DS9. I also respond to like kind of the analog technology, like how everything is like bolts and like heavy, like the scenery, the interior shots. There's no mood lighting here, and instead of phasers, you have guns that like make sounds. There's no silencers in this universe. It's very easy to get into it because I found it very involving for me. And also just how desperate things are. Like, at one point, Starbuck tells the new recruits, hey, you're going to fly today because we don't have a flight simulator. That's not something we have anymore. This world sucks. Welcome. And I'm going to yell at you when you inevitably fuck up.
Starbuck, we've talked about how she's a jerk sometimes. But I was also thinking about what makes her great, because we are told frequently, she's the best pilot I've ever seen. Next week's episode is actually one of my favorite Starbuck episodes. But when she is with the pilots, she gives the sense of like creating chaos, which she then thrives on.
So, yeah, okay. I'm going to go into life coach mode right now. Like,
life coach away.
Please.
I think a lot of people live this way. A lot of people are like not honest about who they are and what they feel, and they can't be honest with their pseudo father-in-law, who also happens to have a complicated business relationship with them, which really it is. And instead of just telling the truth, there are all these like underhanded things that happen to like keep this going and keep it going in an unsustainable direction where we end up again on a planet crashed out with a broken ankle. So like there's a lot of ways that you can sort of change your mind into thinking differently, and also there's a certain amount of like sobriety that the truth requires. So I think that was the other reason that it was hard for me to watch this episode, because I was just like, man, nobody is telling the truth, and like this is really awful. And the one place we are seeing the truth being told is when the president is with her doctor talking about having cancer. And he was like, well, you better pray, you know, like, I guess you should pray because it's pretty bad. And why didn't you come in sooner? And he's sort of chastising her and like talking down to her like she's a little girl. And she's like, yeah, I'm busy. Oh, well. We're getting like echoes of the lack of sort of self-care that we were all sort of realizing that we needed getting into the pandemic, right? Like this is sort of like the lesson that we've learned from that. And also how far cancer treatment has come since 2004, when this was. And so it's sort of weird to watch this now because it's like supposed to be like the future or futuristic, right? And
well, we don't know. It could be the future, it could be the past.
Right.
Who knows? But go ahead.
You know, I think watching it like this far in the future, almost 20 years later, right? And sort of like how far we've come in some ways and how backwards we've gone in other ways. And I don't know. I just think that, again, like mixing in this like masculine and feminine energy of Starbuck. And like, I knew that Starbuck had been a man in the original, and people were like, so cool, let's change her into a woman, you know? And in a lot of ways, I'm like really not sure it worked. And this was sort of like casting like we did in the aughties and 90s, where we were like, we're just going to blindly cast this. Wouldn't it be great if we just flipped this gender? And like now we're in a world where like we have gender fluidity, we have non-binary people, we have people who are transgender, you know, like there's so many more options that are sort of like out and would have been more interesting. And maybe even in Star Trek, they went there a little bit more, you know, in the queer spectrum of things than they did in this. We're still in this really like binary world. That's very masculine. That's very sort of like everything sucks, get ready, you know? And nobody's in a position of nurturing regardless of gender. Like no one is sort of like, oh, it's going to be okay. You know, we'll get through it. Everyone's like, this is bad. This is really bad. The end. Bad, bad, bad. Why should we keep going? You know, like what is there to live for, right? And I think we were in this place in the early 2000s where people were like, what are we living for? You know, like there was a lot of sort of moping that was happening in these different shows. And now I think having been through a pandemic altogether, we're finding all sorts of other ways to pull ourselves up and out, and creating space for that is very important.
Yeah.
And now, for the record, I'm still moping, but
that's your choice, Carl. You're choosing
I know.
to mope, and that's you.
You know what you're saying about gender is interesting. I personally get a lot of strong both masculine and feminine vibes off Starbuck.
I mean, I think as people who are non-binary or not gender conforming are able to come out more on the closet and just able to talk more about those conversations. I went to a concert recently, and lead singer I saw was like, she called this generation full of intrepid gender explorers. And you know, I was so happy she said that, because I'm like, yeah, that's kind of what's happening here. It's all the stuff has all been here, but you know, the way mainstream culture has been able to talk about it has been like, oh, we're going to have Sigourney Weaver read for any part she wants in the Alien franchise, and then we're going to just make her character a woman, and we're not going to write her as a woman. We're just going to show her in, like, panties at one point for for obvious plot reasons.
Because, right.
I feel conflicted about that because, first of all, she does look really hot in that scene. But on the other hand, it's like, why? Why did you do that? What is this? I mean, yes, sex is great in film, but also I don't know. It's weird. And I feel similarly about Kara Thrace, where the way we're going to make a complex female character is also give her masculine traits. And I'm just sort of like, are they masculine and feminine, or is it just a character who just happens to smoke cigars, but also be a woman who, like, enjoys sex and is also kind of dominates conversations and also has a lot of shitty habits that are kind of mere addiction, because she does spend a lot of time, like, trying to please people and also trying to mask her problems. And that's, like, she is not a role model. She is the opposite of Wonder Woman in most ways. And I think it's good to have, I think a healthy entertainment ecosystem means having characters who are awful and characters who are great. Kara Thrace is a complex character, and I think she got, my feelings for the rest of the series is I wanted more of her, and the series kind of makes her take a backseat at more than one point, and I'm like, what a waste.
You know, the best thing about this stretch of episodes is this is sort of the Starbuck we met. Mm-hmm. You know, we should point out the attitude wasn't all, it's awesome that we make her a woman, because there was also a really prevalent attitude of, you are killing me by making her a woman because I'm an internet misogynist.
I remember that.
Yeah.
It was the same guys who were mad that Heimdall was black in the first Thor movie. Yeah,
it is exactly the same guys. And it is, I was thinking of reading, I'm not going to read some of it. Basically, once upon a time there was a man named Dirk Benedict. And he played a character named Starbuck in the 70s, Battlestar Galactica. Mm-hmm. Then he heard that Battlestar was being reimagined and that his character would be a woman. He got mad. He wrote an essay.
No.
It's a terrible essay.
No!
I'm not... You every bit of it you have heard.
Yeah.
Every bit of it is baked into you if you have seen this kind of internet misogyny. But, like... He calls her Star Doe. I guess that's all. Star Doe.
Gross.
Get it? I have a interview with Katie Sackhoff talking about what it was like to audition for the role, and she experimented a lot. Like, she kept being told you're not quite what they're looking for, but they want to see you again. People not in theater may not know how much thought actors put into what they're wearing as they audition. And one time she came in wearing stilettos, high heels, and someone said to her, I don't know, maybe you shouldn't do that to audition for a pilot. And she just, fuck that. Starbuck wouldn't give a fuck. I'm wearing my high heels. And
I would love to see that Starbuck. Like, that. I would love to see that.
I mean, I think we did see that Starbuck to an extent, her not giving a fuck. I mean, like, we do see her, like, it takes a certain level of not give a fuck to sleep with one of your students, which she does in the academy. It also takes a level of not give a fuck to, when she has that group of students with her, like, and she is just like, to you, my name is God. What I say is scripture. And then she nicknames one of the characters Hot Dog. And my favorite thing about Hot Dog is he's a recurring character throughout the rest of the series. She does have a fuck you attitude. It's just with that fuck you attitude, it's not all everything is feminist and great. It's also, she's a very flawed person. So the fuck you attitude is like, it's good in some ways and bad in others. And it feels like a real person in that way. I don't know. So I see the through line between where this is the same Starbuck who would wear stilettos, is the same Starbuck who would smoke a cigar while playing with her 8-sided weird cards. And, while she, like, taunts Gaius Baltar, which one of my favorite parts of the episode, mostly because I have such a love-hate relationship with that character, who like shows up for 5 seconds, and it all came flooding back, all of it. Yeah, so I mean, I enjoyed this episode. It brought back also my complex feelings about like being like rah military and showing that, but I mean, it's also a show where even the military can't protect you from the end of the world, so I don't know. It's much like Starbuck, it's very complex and interesting, and I'm not sure, like, I don't think there's a moral lesson to be learned from most of Battlestar Galactica. It's more just a catharsis and watching people fuck up and still try to survive.
Well, this is exactly the conversation I was sort of hoping to have, because I feel like this, if there is a moral to Battlestar, it is like delve into the complexity, and that may not be enough for what people are looking for now, but it is for its time and its place. I think politically, I think there were progressives who hated Battlestar. And there were conservatives who loved it, and conservatives who hated it as well. But Battlestar was sort of willing to say, "All right, we've come out of the '90s. The world looks grimmer now. In some way, this show is just like let's take a look at where we are. Like, let's not flinch away. Let's not speak in metaphor. Let's figure out what we can expect from this world." And I think it's not surprising that we have, different opinions about what is successful and what is not.
I also think, like, we can't only have one kind of show on TV and only have that kind. Like, I watch horror movies. I also watch the show The Good Place, which is just, like, much fluffier and has, I think, a much sweeter view of life. And, I can't always watch one thing. I'm a complicated person, man. I like my DS9 sometimes, and I like my goofy original Trek where you have that episode where it's two aliens and that look like their faces look like the black and white cookie, and they're mad at each other because one of them has the white on the wrong side or something. Like, I like the goofiness of that, and I also want to see, like, people dealing with really complex issues. Like, I don't think what a wonderful thing to not have entertainment always be one thing. Saying that, Battlestar Galactica is not a series I recommend to people who are like, I just want to watch something happy. I just want to watch a sitcom. That's fair too. Sometimes life is tough and you just want to watch something silly. And I don't think Battlestar Galactica fulfills that, especially not the revised series with Stardough. What the fuck?
I have to say that, like, also, we are just pre-Me Too. Like, and so I think for me, that's bringing up a lot of, like, issues of the character and issues of, like, making this female character more masculine because she has to be tough, because in order to get these things you have to do this and you have to do that. And we're also dealing with the fact that we're still having casting couches at this time. It's hard for me to watch almost anything from, like, this time period, like this sort of pre Me Too time, because there's also a specific type, like blonde, thin, tall, like pretty much then you could do anything. You could get cast in anything, we see that a lot in Star Trek. We're not seeing a lot of, like, different shaped bodies. So I think that it's hard for me to go back there and be like, oh, look, remember this time, unless there's some sort of comedy attached to it. Like the show Kath and Kim, which is a really hilarious Audi's show from Australia about a mother and daughter that they're just, horrible people, but they're very funny, horrible people, as opposed to, like, the world's going to end, I'm making bad choices, blow it all up, And, I think I tried to watch The Office from this time too, the British Office, and some of the jokes are just like, whoa, like, we're in this time right now where, like, even the jokes everything was about being offensive. Everything was about like glorifying making bad choices. And I don't think we're in that place anymore. You know, like I think Star Trek is much more of a sitcom vibe. It's much more of like, here's your packaged meal, enjoy. Here's another serving, you know, as opposed to like, this is like stress eating a bag of chips, you know, for like hours until your mouth is like bleeding in the corners because you've had so much salt. And then you're like, what are the choices I've made? Give me a beer. So, you know, it's just a very different watching experience. And I think it's interesting because this is a remake. And so we're also starting to get into like, oh, well, it's a remake, you know, like we're starting to get into this groove of like, let's remake a show as opposed to Star Trek, which like you have all of these, you have this world that continues, right? And you're like continuing on with the story, but like Star Trek wasn't a remake of something else. It was its own thing. And then it's like, this whole world evolved from it, which I think actually is more relatable to Game of Thrones because you have this whole world that's created, and then they're like, now we're going to turn this into a show.
Battlestar was the show that convinced me I should not automatically look down on remakes. For a while, I thought, like, remakes, unoriginal. And then it's like, the show I like best on TV is called Battlestar Galactica. I can't look down on this stuff anymore. What's frustrating about Dirk Benedict and his little essay is his misogyny and his opposition to remakes kind of seem to go hand in hand. Like you are besmirching some sort of holy text, and that's really annoying. And we've met a lot of annoying people.
Well, we see that was part of the reason Julie Taymor's Spider-Man bit the dust so hard, because she took a franchise that people had very specific expectations for, which you get in the comic book world over and over and over again. You know, you can't change what Uncle Ben says as he dies, even when it's in a musical on Broadway. And you especially can't bring it back in the second act when he didn't actually say it when he died in the first act. So, you know, there's certain things that you can't like betray of the audience. But I think that brings up a really valid point, you know, because you know, Gillian and I have very different opinions as audience members, right? Mm-hmm. And like, so who is the audience? And, you know, are the creators trying to please that audience, or are they trying to be true to the story? You know,
are they trying to challenge people? And I mean, I was just talking about Julie Taymor yesterday because I think her movie Titus Andronicus is such a wonderful interpretation of the Shakespeare play of the same name. I think it improves on the text with the visuals she gives it. And I think that level of reinterpretation she invests in the characters in order to make a through line that's like very anti-war, very anti-military, to me anyway, while embracing the characters and their complexities in a show that's actually very tonally weird and strange. And she's just like, yeah, let's make it weirder. Let's make it take place across 3 different time periods and never explain what's going on. Like, that's fantastic. And I think with her Spider-Man Broadway show, you know, and I've listened to Turn Off the Dark, that song, over and over again, but I've never, besides like reading through what the show is about, I've never seen it because it didn't sound like she wanted to do Spider-Man so much as sort of like a Greek tragedy that happened to have superhero characters. I mean, I think we're spinning off in a very different direction, but yeah, I think audience expectations are huge, and you have to ask yourself, are you going to make a cozy show where you're just going to philosophically talk about PTSD the way I think this episode of DS9 did? Or are you going to show the act of like regret and seeking forgiveness and failing to earn forgiveness in an act of contrition, and just show a world where things are devastating and things are really hard? And I don't think the flaws of the characters are glorified, but I think we're also given space to kind of wallow in what those in that pain. And for some people that's very cathartic and great, and for others that's hard and that sucks to watch. And for as much as I loved watching Battlestar Galactica when it was on TV, I have not spent a lot of time revisiting it. I think this is the first episode of Battlestar Galactica I've rewatched in years. It was tough, but I was also like, oh my God, I remember this. I remember that. And without that shield of nostalgia, I think my response would have been much closer to Emily's. Like, it's hard to get into a show when the reasons to care about anything are sort of like, well, you want to see them survive, right? And it's like, I don't know, do I?
Yeah, how much am I willing to invest in this? And like, you know, I think Game of Thrones asks us that all the time. Like, how much can I invest in these characters? Are they going to die in this episode or the next episode? Like, which, you know, is a totally different... I don't think they would have even done that during this time period of making TV, right?
One reason I did this podcast now is I have a feeling it's about to get rediscovered. It's about 20 years old at this point. And they are talking about making another remake. I don't know how I feel about that, but yeah. Gillian's disturbed.
My feeling is just like they tried to continue the story with other spin-offs anyway. I think they should just try doing that instead.
Yeah, Battlestar Galactica, Blood and Chrome. Ooh, yeah.
Sure.
But I do remember thinking in the oddies, like, this show is fascinating, but will people still talk about it in 10, 15 years? And I think they definitely talk about Star Trek more.
Oh, yeah.
Definitely. But maybe we should balance that seesaw. Here on Battlespace 9, these episodes have been Soldiers of the Empire for Deep Space Nine, Act of Contrition for Battlestar Galactica. The theme is getting back up when you've been knocked down. So who wins, in your opinion? Which episodes did you enjoy watching more on this week?
I think I'm going to say Act of Contrition for me. I think there's just like more going on, and I think with DS9 you have layered characters compared to a lot of the other Star Treks. But with Battlestar Galactica, revisiting it, I was just like, wow, these people are really fucked up. This is interesting. So I would say Act of Contrition wins it for me, but only by a hair. If it was a little less tense, if the stakes went too over the top, for me, I would have been like, nah, this isn't my thing. But no, I right now I'm going to say Act of Contrition.
Act of Contrition. Emily, what do you think?
Oh, definitely the Star Trek episode. You know, definitely. It was a nice little package. I thought it was really well written. I thought it was well acted. I thought it was enough. It was just enough. It wasn't trying to be anything that it wasn't. It really like fully accepted itself. And as someone who like is not even really, I'm not at all a sci-fi fan. I could get into it. I could relate to the characters. I could know what was happening and not feel excluded by the language or the camera shots or anything else. There were like no distractions. It was just, okay, here's the story. It felt really enjoyable.
That makes sense. I was thinking about this myself. I sort of, Emily, you mentioned not liking the writing on Act of Contrition. I think I like the story structure, but I found a lot of the dialogue a little dull. Yes. But the acting was great, I thought, and it was sort of a reflection of. I think none of these characters really want to be saying the things they're saying, so I found it kind of realistic in that way. But I feel like the flashback structure was kind of a mistake a little bit. Because I have heard of people watching it and not being quite sure what's happening in the present versus the past.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty clear, but there are times where there's cuts that just irritate. There is a moment, she confesses to Adama, and we see his reaction. But before we see his reaction, we cut back to a flashback of, I guess, the flashback where she lies for the first time.
And she's
and
like,
it's just,
yeah.
It takes me out of the moment. It really, I really want to see Adama react in that moment. So this is not the first time I've sort of felt Battlestar is slightly more overpaced than I am used to. This is kind of a 2000s thing, though. Like I feel like this was in a lot of TV shows until I think Breaking Bad was the one who finally owned it and finally like killed it. I think they're like, all right, we're going to do this every single time. We're going to do like 3 weeks earlier, 2 weeks later, and we are Breaking Bad, so no one else can do it. That's just my memory of the oddies. So I will say Deep Space Nine as well this week. But Act of Contrition is definitely a necessary episode and a key episode of sort of a Dama drama. Who Starbuck is.
Dama drama.
That's what I'm told. I think that's what they used to call it, Gillian. Do you remember this term as well, a Dama drama?
I mean, as you say it out loud, you're uncovering a memory for me. But a Dama drama, regardless of how much it was used on message boards back in the day, that's very accurate. I mean, like many science fiction shows that are about exploring the universe, it often comes down to one family and their problem. I do think I found the themes of sort of forgiveness and stuff, and like not just vulnerability explored by the Klingons in DS9, but also just sort of like pushing into, okay, this is what happens when you lie to someone. Like that was really interesting to see on screen. And so was like the timeline, sort of the order of things being played with. Like, I thought that was interesting, but yeah, it would not be the first episode I would recommend to viewers, even if they are into really distressing shows about really distressing things.
Well, and that being said, I felt like, I think maybe we're getting at the heart of it. Maybe it wasn't the writing, and maybe it wasn't the acting. Maybe it actually was the editing, right? That is really distracting and taking away from the storytelling.
Yeah, and particularly for a show that prides itself on you are there, on naturalism. It's a kind of a funny choice. I guess you could say that it was effective in conveying like the soupy morass that Starbuck is in. I feel like we lose other things through it.
Well, it's like, who's telling the story?
Thank you for being on our show. Is there anything you want to plug?
So my short story in The Dark magazine is my most recent publication. My website is Gillian Daniels. That's Gillian with a G, Gillian, Daniels.com. And you can see what I'm doing. And it's mostly writing fiction and sending it out into the void and hoping it gets published. And I don't know, on social media, I'm mostly sharing what I'm reading and yelling about media. So that's what I'm doing. And Carl, thank you so much for having me on this show. It's just so nice to talk about media like this.
Absolutely. Emily?
Yes, if you're interested in life coaching, if you need help visioning for your life, or you want a different perspective on things, then check me out. You can follow me on Instagram at Emily Taradash Coaching. You can see my upcoming comedy shows as well as other opportunities. I'm often giving free talks, and so some of them are now in person, which is very exciting, and some of them are online, so yay. And I also have a Facebook page, so you can find me there, Emily Taradash Coaching on Facebook. Find me there. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. Tune in next week. Next week's theme is Leaving No One Behind, and the episodes are Deep Space Nine's Change of Heart and Battlestar Galactica's You Can't Go Home Again. I am Carl, and you may refer to me as God. Good night.